It's Thursday, July 2nd, 2020. 2 Corinthians 8:9 says, and perhaps you can quote it with me, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich." We're nearing the end of our series on grace, where we've been working our way through the truths that have been suggested by our theme verse these past few weeks. And so far, we've covered 7 principles. In order for us to be rich, he had to become poor. In order for us to have life, he had to die. In order for us to be forgiven, he had to be punished. In order for us to be accepted, he had to be rejected. In order for us to become wise, he had to play the fool. In order for us to become significant, he had to become nothing. And in order for us to become strong, he had to become weak. Yesterday we talked about the day when Jesus sat on that hillside and blessed the children as he held them in his arms. But Jesus found himself in a place where he had to insist of his followers that they allow the children to come to him. The followers had apparently thought that Jesus was, too busy to spend time with the children, or they may have thought that with all the dust and the heat that the children would have been too sweaty and dirty to sit with Jesus. In any event, the followers rebuked the parents of the children for even thinking that Jesus would have time for their little ones. But Jesus became indignant. And I have to admit, I can't really picture Jesus being in that state of mind, so I'm not sure what it would have looked like to see Jesus indignant. All we really know is that Jesus was pretty worked up over the fact that the followers were not letting the children come to him. He scolded his followers and told them to make way for the kids, to give them the opportunity to come close. And the really beautiful thing about this is Jesus has been gone for 2,000 years now, and he hasn't changed. He still wants the children to be able to find their way to him, and he still wants his followers to let the children get close to him. And you'd think that as his followers, we'd be determined to make a way for all people to find their way to Jesus. Too often we have rules and regulations and expectations and an ever-growing grocery list that we apply as we insist that people get better before they try to get close to Jesus. Now, most of the people that are preventing others from getting close to Jesus are truly nice people. They just have a tendency to make rules that others should keep so that they'll be the kind of people that Jesus can welcome. We speak on Jesus' behalf, but we don't represent him very well at all. That doesn't change the fact that those people who prevent other people from coming to Jesus are nice people. I say that because there are a lot of people who make rules for themselves. They feel that they can't be close to God because of things that they see in their lives. They tell themselves, if I could just get rid of this and this and this, then God would accept me. And even better, if I could just make sure that this and this and this are always part of my life, then I'd be able to get as close to God as I want. And the people who make rules like that for themselves are some of the hardest working people I know. But unfortunately, the people who make all those rules for themselves are also some of the most unhappy people I know. I found that it's very hard to get through to people like that. It's almost impossible to get people like that to relax enough to simply rest in the grace of God. No matter how often you remind them that God's grace is sufficient, they still feel dirty and unworthy. They don't know anything about God's unmerited favor because they will not believe that unmerited favor always comes to us undeserved. And they don't believe the principles that drive our understanding that when we don't get the punishment we deserve, that's mercy. And when we get the reward that we don't deserve, that's grace. Now, the fact that they don't understand that has nothing to do with their intelligence. It has everything to do with their inability to believe that God's grace reaches into the depths of the most undeserving human heart and sets that heart free. People who are unwilling to accept God's grace can't be spontaneous with God because they think that God won't listen to them. They feel they have to get everything right before God will enjoy being with them. Since they never come to the point where they have everything right and have gotten everything right, a close relationship with God will always be the most elusive thing in their lives. That's because people like that believe that they get close to God by keeping the rules. And no matter how often you talk about the grace of God, they don't want anything to do with it because they can't conceive it. They can't believe it. They can't understand it. They're comfortable with the rules that they've made for themselves. They try to win God's favor every moment of every day. And I hope that you'll forgive me if I say that they're the most pathetic people that I know. Because in the end, for anyone who does life like that, there really are only two ways that it can end. Either they reach the conclusion that they can't keep the rules, and because they know that they can't keep the rules, in the end, they stop trying to get close to God. And with each passing day, they sense that God is getting further and further away from them. So they either reach the conclusion that they can't keep the rules, so they just stop trying, or they begin to believe that they're keeping the rules, something that's almost like a default button for them. And when they begin to believe that they already are keeping the rules, then they stop growing because they think they've arrived. And they have a tendency to look down on other people who aren't quite so good at keeping the rules. And then the day comes when these I'm keeping the rules people get old like me, and when that happens, they won't ever change. They won't ever change even though they're miserable. I try not to let it bother me because we all have our own choices to make, but I've discovered that people who try desperately to keep the rules and become miserable are not content to be miserable on their own. They seem to want other people to be miserable too. And even though they've been miserable their whole lives, even though they know they can't keep the rules themselves, they keep insisting that other people try to keep the rules, even though they know that those people are going to fail. People like that may have given you the idea that you're too dirty to crawl into God's lap to ask for his blessing, because they've set aside the grace of God for themselves, and by golly, they will set the grace of God aside for you as well. And just as we saw in Paul's writings yesterday, as far as the lives and ministry of the people who insist on keeping the rules are concerned, Christ died for nothing. Because as we've already said, Christ died to bring us to God. But those rule keepers have spent their whole lives keeping people away from God. So what am I trying to say? Well, I talk sometimes to people who have made mistakes and even strayed into sin. They find themselves always falling short of the expectations they set for themselves. They try hard, really hard, all the time. But they never seem able to get things as right as they wish to get them. They finally reach a conclusion. I just don't deserve God's grace. And you would think that they would immediately catch the contradiction in what they're saying when they say that. They're bemoaning the fact that they don't deserve something that God only gives to people who don't deserve it. Not deserving is built right into the definition of grace. We've said it so many times already. When God gives us the reward that we don't deserve, that's grace. So why would any of us say that we don't deserve this thing that God only gives to those who don't deserve it? Well, we're out of time again. So why not take some time to pray? I hope that you're getting in the habit of praying at the end of our times together, and I hope that you'll maintain that habit even if after our studies on grace have come to an end. As you pray, ask God to teach you about the undeserved nature of grace. We often say that God doesn't save all ungodly people, but he saves only ungodly people. He saves people who don't deserve to be saved. He forgives people who don't deserve to be forgiven. He gives life to people who don't deserve to be alive. He gives his riches to people who don't deserve to receive them. So please understand that if you find yourself to be totally undeserving of God's favor, then you are actually exactly where you need to be to have God's grace in all its fullness flow into your life. So take the time to ask God to show you how little you deserve, so that he can give you all of his riches at Christ's expense. Let's talk again tomorrow.